I've been reading the laws of UX because I'm not a designer, but I want to learn how I can use psychology to design better products and services so I can bring this into my mobile app and just anything else that I build. This book truly is for anyone who wants to improve their design and just understand why people react to certain designs and what makes a good design, what makes it a good experience for the end user. There's 10 laws I'm going to go through and just give you like a quick rundown, and then I'm going to go into the Micro Moments app and see if there's anything that we could improve based on these laws. The first law is Jacob's law, and this means that everyone has a mental model of how an app should look based on what they've already experienced. When you go to Facebook, you experience a feed of posts and you're able to like and comment. You go to Instagram, you expect that same feed of posts that you can like and comment. You go to any other social platform like Threads or Twitter, you see an infinite scrolling feed that you can like and comment. Those are called mental models. And the reason why it's important to preserve mental models when you're building new applications is because there's already so much going on in the world that we have to spend our cognitive load on to remember and think about and prioritize, like doing the dishes and taking your dog out for a walk, and just the list goes on. And so when you can implement the same mental models into your application, that helps the user be able to log on to the app and immediately know what it is supposed to do without having to spend precious brain energy on how do I use this. Something that I found interesting is that the designs of technology actually reference like physical aspects of the world, like form elements look like a control panel in the aircraft. I thought that was really cool. This is an example of YouTube where they had a whole redesign of their, but they gave you the option to opt in to that new experience, not forcing it on you. These are some other good examples. I like this Mercedes-Benz one because it's literally the shape of a seat. So you know, like the top part is where your head is, the middle part is where your back is, and then the bottom part is where your legs are. Super intuitive. It doesn't make me think what controls do what. That's the power of a mental model. When designing for products, there's also something called a user persona. So certain people see the world certain ways, like men and women, just for example. When you know exactly who your users are, you can cater to that experience to provide a better experience. Let's look at the Micro Moments app. I think what works well here is that this is going to be an infinite feed. People are already used to, that's a mental model that already exists for post. So it's an infinite feed of post. Tabs at the bottom is another mental model that people are used to. It's also where your thumbs live. And I specifically put the log moment form in the middle so that it could appeal to both left and right hand. A lot of people like put it on the right because most people are right-handed, but for people who are left-handed, have to reach across the screen, and I didn't want that. The main objective of this app is to be able to log a moment. So for every user, I think having it in the middle just makes more sense. And again, these are so categories going into a drop down. This is a common practice. This day picker is also pretty standard UX, which I personally like. I love the sound that it makes too. I think it is way easier to enter a date in this kind of day picker than the web version where you have to come in, click. The more clicks that it takes to do something, the less the user is going to want to do it. These being form fields are pretty standard, but I will say I should have a box to indicate that it is an input field. Color there is not looking good. Description box should definitely show the fuller width to show that descriptions are typically longer than a title. These boxes would not be the same height. Having a cancel button is pretty good practice. Having the notifications in the top right, having functions that you don't typically reach for at the top are also good mental models and good practice. I think functionality wise, this is fine, but it doesn't look good to me. I would like to make this better, but it's pretty common to have the profile and settings on the top right or top left. Okay, let's move on. Chapter 2 is Fitts Law. The time to acquire a target is a function of the distance to and the size of the target. What this essentially means is that buttons should be easily accessible. That is the whole point of the button, is to click. And when they are too close to each other, it's very easy to fat finger it. So having a gap between is part of the human interface guidelines set by Apple and just other design systems. And then not just buttons, but also the touch space on the screen. So everything in the center is usually the most accurate to touch. And this is just a visual diagram showing that. I talked about how my form field doesn't have the appropriate boxes, so the touch space is not good. This is a good example by LinkedIn where the buttons have ample space between them, so you're not accidentally clicking the X when you're trying to click the check. Edges are also very important. Chapter 3, Miller's Law. By definition, the average person can keep only 7 plus or minus 2 items in their working memory. And what this means is that we need to organize content into smaller chunks to help the user process. For example, these are all filters, and if I were to just put every single one of these filters into one, then that would be very hectic. I'd have to break it up. Like, I've sorted the categories into its own filter. I have the privacy into its own filter, and then I have the date into its own filter area. So that's an example of chunking. This is another good example of this wall of text, or you may notice like when you're reading books and it's just one huge long paragraph, that's kind of hard to read. Here is a great example where I just have a huge wall of text and it makes it hard for me to read. But whenever I had saved it, I broke it into a better looking format. And what I recently pushed an update is to preserve this same text format. Now I've broken it up and it's definitely way better to read. Another example is how Bloomberg here has the main article that it wants you to know about, these sidebars, and then other, like, it's just broken down. And this is a good example of chunking, how Google Forms has, there's so many things that you could do with the text editor, but it would be overwhelming to show every single option all at once. And so what they've done is they've sectioned it, chunked it into organized content. The magical number that you can store in your head is 7 plus or minus 2. So here's like another example of how every e-commerce store has sectioned by different types of clothing, garments, etc. I did it a little bit here where I have the year and then everything that lives inside of the year is broken by some space. Hick's law. The time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices available. The best way I can think of this is when you walk into a department store and they have hundreds of women's dresses and you're a little overstimulated because there's so many options and so much to go through and try on. Let's say you're looking for a wedding dress or wedding guest dress, and you can go directly into that section and just look through those. When looking at an interface, you want to experience that same feeling of things are broken down into smaller steps so I can accomplish my goal. That's exactly why this MVP especially is super simple. We're coming in here, we're able to see our moments, we're able to log our moments, and we're able to visualize our wheel of life. And this is a new feature where we're adding a streak, which I think is super cute, but I wanted to add more things to it and I really had to cut them out. I wanted to be able to throw in like quotes and attach the moments and all these things. I had to strip them out because the primary function of this streaks is to show the days and not overcomplicate it. So when the user sees a streak card, I want them to know how many days. I think this is a good example here because I could make this limitless, right? I could give you like 20 different options that you could fill in the gradients to have 20 different colors in it, but that would be overwhelming, overstimulating, and who is going to take the time to sit there and pick like 20 different colors. So I limited it to 3 options. I even handpicked the color palette, which in the future I do want to add like a button here so you can customize whatever color you want for the people that want to do that. But I think this is good in following Hick's law of eliminating as many abstractions as you can. This is a classic example of too many options that you don't actually use on the TV remote. And then you look at Apple, like every single button is used in every time you use the remote. That's good UX. Netflix is a great example where they break it into trending now, popular on Netflix, action movies, comedy movies. Now they've even broken up movies and TV shows in my favorites. So I think that's a good example. Chapter 5 is Postel's law, which is really important because human error is expected. When you design for that, then you're providing a good human experience because it is a human on the other end of that device that is using your technology, your software, your app. So we can try to predict, we can't assume how users will use the technology, but regarding forms, it's considerate to be conservative of the amount of fields that you ask someone to fill in. If you have 20 different fields, they're not going to fill that in. I think a good example of this is when you go to the doctor or hospital or whatever, and they give you like 5 pages of input fields to fill out. That is overwhelming, and the chances of someone filling out every single field form is not going to happen. You should only ask for what is truly necessary. So that's why my form is very short. Responsive web design is so important because someone could be looking at your app or website from any type of device, whether it be an iPad, iPhone, website. There are so many different screen sizes out there. We have to build and accommodate for all of them. So having a very fluid design is important. Chapter 6 is peak end rule. And this is not just in terms of design, this is a psychology rule, is that people typically remember the end of the experience rather than the total sum or every single moment. This is a cognitive bias, also known as a memory bias, is just as humans, we recall the end of an event more than the beginning or the whole part of it. So when you think of a relationship and it ending, you're usually thinking of everything that happened right before it ended rather than the entire experience as a whole. Also, like when you go to a really nice hotel, you're not necessarily still thinking about the moment that you stepped into the hotel, but rather leaving the hotel on the memories that you had the day before and the service that you're getting the day before, the checkout experience. That's usually what sticks in your brain because it is just the last thing that you experienced. Spotify Wrapped is a really great example, and that's what I'm trying to build into this app with the wins wrapped. Spotify, Uber, and Duolingo all do a really good job at highlighting these peak moments, such as Spotify wraps the entire year. So everyone looks forward to the end of the year just for the Spotify Wrapped. For Uber, they changed the game on knowing the time that it's going to take for the driver to get to you and how long it'll take to get to the destination. Because back then, you were just like hauling a taxi. You had no idea when the taxi was going to come. You had no idea how long it would take the cab driver to get to the destination. They've done a really good job at showing real time. And then Duolingo introduced gamification. Duolingo has this streak day progression indicator, which I think would be good to add to my streak indicator. Chapter 7 is aesthetic usability effect. Users perceive something that looks better to actually work better. Not only is it an emotional, positive experience, it enhances our cognitive ability. If you look at this calculator here, the one that scored the highest is this calculator here, because all the numbers are grouped together, and then you have clear indicators of these are different, do different things, this does a different thing.